scariest thing about being home alone isn't the silence. It's the noises you can't explain. That night, I thought I was safe. I thought I was alone. I was halfway through a bowl of popcorn, the soft glow of the TV the only light in the room when it happened. At first, I thought it was nothing, a flicker in my peripheral vision. But then I turned, and there it was, a shadow, a tall, solid shadow moving across the hallway. My heart slammed against my ribs. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Something was in my home, and I had no idea what it wanted. For a moment, I sat frozen, my body refusing to cooperate with the commands my brain was screaming, turn on the light, check the hallway, do something, but I couldn't. Was stare at the dark void of the hallway, half expecting the shadow to return, half praying I had imagined it. The bowl of popcorn on my lap felt heavier than it should, as if every part of me was being weighed down by the sudden suffocating realization. You're not alone. I forced myself to move, slowly placing the bowl on the coffee table, the clink of ceramic against wood startling me more than it should have. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly that I nearly dropped it. My first thought was to call someone, anyone, but who? What would I even say? Hi, I think there's a shadow in my hallway. It sounded absurd, even to me. Suddenly feeling insufficient, like it couldn't reach far enough to push back the encroaching darkness, darkness. Then it happened again. A faint tapping, almost rhythmic, came from deeper in the hallway. It wasn't loud, but in the heavy silence of my apartment, it might as well have been a scream. My stomach twisted. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears as I strained to listen. Tap, 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 tap. Deliberate, calculated, as though it was meant for me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I leaned forward and flicked on the lamp beside me. Light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows clinging to the corners. The tapping stopped. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I stared at the hallway again, willing myself to get up and check, but my feet refused to move. I grabbed my phone again, this time pulling up my friend Jenna's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button, but before I could press it, something else caught my attention, a faint creak, like the sound of a door slowly opening. The hallway loomed in front of me, darker and more menacing than ever. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the old apartment was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone, or something, was there, waiting. The creak echoed in my mind, louder than it had any right to be. My bedroom door, I knew it. Had to be. I had shut it earlier, hadn't I? My pulse thudded in my ears as I tried to convince myself it was just the draft. Old apartments like mine were full of quirks, right? The doors moved on their own all the time, didn't they? But even as I grasped for logical explanations, my instincts screamed at me that this wasn't normal. My thumb trembled over Jenna's number, but I couldn't bring myself to hit call. What if it was nothing, and I ended up sounding ridiculous? Worse, what if it wasn't nothing, and I attracted whatever it was by making noise? The floor felt cold under my bare feet as I rose slowly from the couch, clutching my phone like a lifeline. My hands were so sweaty it almost slipped from my grip. Step by step, I moved toward the hallway, my breathing shallow and ragged. Every creak of the floorboards felt deafening, like I was announcing my presence to whatever might be lurking in the shadows. I reached the edge of the hallway and hesitated. The air felt wrong, heavier somehow, thick, with a metallic tang that made my nose wrinkle. My bedroom door stood ajar, its edges outlined faintly by the soft light spilling in from the living room. I was sure I'd closed it. That's when I saw it, a faint, wet trail leading from the door into the darkness beyond. It looked like footprints, bare human footprints shimmering faintly like they'd just been made. My stomach twisted violently as I tried to process what I was seeing. I hadn't stepped into anything wet. I hadn't even left the living room. And then it hit me. Those weren't my footprints. A soft sound broke the silence, low and breathy, almost like someone whispering. Make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't friendly. My hand clenched. Around my phone, my thumb finally hitting Jenna's number. The call rang once, twice. Then cut off, the screen flashing no signal. The soft whispering grew louder, the words still unclear but rising in intensity. My gaze darted toward the footprints again. They were smeared now, as if something had dragged itself across the floor. I backed up instinctively, the living room light suddenly feeling too dim, too far away to protect me. The whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound that froze the blood in my veins. The slow, deliberate turning of the doorknob. My doorknob, the one leading to the front door. The sound of the doorknob turning was slow, deliberate, like whoever or whatever was on the other side wanted me to hear it. My stomach churned as my feet rooted themselves to the floor. Run, my brain screamed, but my body wouldn't respond. The metal rattled lightly, followed by a soft click, as if the lock was being tested. Hello? My voice cracked, barely a whisper, though I hated myself for saying anything at all. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that makes you question if you've truly spoken aloud, or if your words were swallowed whole by the oppressive atmosphere. And then, the doorknob stopped moving. For a moment I hoped that it was over, that whoever was there had given up and left. But then the door itself creaked, just a fraction, as though someone was gently pressing against it. The narrow gap that appeared wasn't wide enough for me to see anything, but it was enough to send a wave of nausea crashing over me. It felt like an invitation, an unspoken dare to come closer. I took a step back instead, retreating toward the hallway, my eyes locked on the door, my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it's just someone lost drunk, trying the wrong apartment. Maybe it's a prank, but none of it explained the wet footprints. None of it explained the whispering. The floor groaned behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. My bedroom door was wide open now, not just ajar, fully open, as if someone had thrown it that way in a hurry. Within, a soft, rhythmic scratching sound like nails against wood. My mouth went dry as I stared into the gaping darkness of the room. The dim light from the living room stretched only so far, stopping short of revealing anything inside. It's not possible, I thought. You're imagining this. You locked the bedroom door earlier. It was shut. You locked it. The scratching stopped. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The presence wasn't just in the apartment. It was close, too close. My breathing came in shallow gasps as I backed up again, toward the couch, toward the false safety of the light. My phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. I didn't bother picking it up. My eyes darted between the bedroom door and the front door, torn between the horrors each might hold. And then I heard it, a deep, guttural breath, not from the front door, not from the bedroom, from right behind me. I screamed and spun around, flailing blindly in the dim light, and that's when I saw it, a figure. Human-shaped but wrong, too tall, its proportions distorted, as though someone had stretched it unnaturally. Its skin was pale and slick, almost wet, and its face, God, its face, was an empty expanse where features should have been. No eyes, no nose, just a crooked, jagged smile that split its face in two. It lunged. I stumbled backward, slamming into the coffee table and sending the popcorn bowl crashing to the floor. My hand found the lamp and I ripped it from the table, swinging it wildly. The figure recoiled, its jagged smile twisting into something that looked like pain or rage. With a high-pitched, inhuman screech that felt like nails scraping against my skull. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I bolted toward the front door, yanking it open with more strength than I thought I had. The hallway outside was empty, silent, and cold. I ran, barefoot down the corridor, my only thought to get as far away as possible. When I reached the stairwell, I chanced to look back. My apartment door was still open, the light from inside spilling into the dark hallway, and there, standing in the doorway, was the figure, watching me, its head tilted unnaturally to one side as if it was curious, and then, without Moving its body, it raised one long, pale hand and waved. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, the crisp night air stinging my lungs. My neighbors looked at me like I was insane as I banged on their doors, screaming for help. By the time the police arrived, I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. They didn't find anything. No footprints. No damage to the apartment. Nothing. They told me it was probably a nightmare, stress, an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw, and I know, as I sit here now, too afraid to go back to that apartment, that whatever it was isn't done with me. I still see that smile in my mind every time I close my eyes. Even after moving in with Jenna, temporarily, her warm, cozy apartment felt alien. We're too close, every shadow too deep, every noise too sharp. My mind kept replaying them. Moment I saw it, the figure in my apartment, standing in the doorway with that impossibly wide smile, the way it tilted its head as if it knew I would never forget it. Jenna tried to comfort me, telling me the police were right, that it was stress, lack of sleep, maybe even a panic attack, but I wasn't convinced. How could I be? I could still smell it, the faint metallic tang that clung to the air in my apartment. I could still feel its presence, like icy fingers tracing the back of my neck. The next day, I decided to go back to the apartment to pack my things. Jenna offered to come with me, but I told her no. Somehow, I felt like this was something I needed to face alone. I don't know why. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. When I opened the door to my apartment, everything looked normal, too normal. The furniture was exactly where I'd left it. The popcorn bowl was gone, probably cleaned up by the landlord. After the police left, the air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, but underneath it, that metallic tang still lingered. I moved quickly, grabbing clothes, toiletries, and whatever else I could stuff into a suitcase. I told myself I wouldn't stay longer than necessary, but as I reached for the closet, I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, just like my bedroom door had been that night. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I stared at the thin sliver of darkness behind it. It's just a closet. It's just a closet. I yanked the door open, half expecting to see it again, crouched inside, but it was empty. No figure, no shadows, just my coats and shoes, undisturbed. I let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over me in waves. Maybe Jenna was right. Maybe I'd imagined it all. And then I saw the scratches. They were faint but unmistakable. Long, jagged marks gouged into the back of the closet door, as though something with claws had been waiting inside. My breath caught as my eyes traced over them, my fingers brushing against the rough grooves. That's when I saw the words etched deep into the wood beneath the scratches. You're never alone. I stumbled back, the suitcase forgotten on the floor. My mind raced. I wanted to leave, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. That's when the closet door, still open, creaked softly. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. It was something else. I bolted, leaving the suitcase behind, leaving everything behind. The landlord called me later that week to ask when I was coming back for my things. I didn't have the courage to tell him I never would. Now, weeks later, I'm still haunted. Jenna says I'm jumpy, paranoid. She doesn't understand that. It isn't over. I've felt it, even here in her apartment, the faint sensation of being watched, of something lingering just out of sight. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then, last night, I saw it again. The same shadow, the same smile. It's not just in the apartment. It followed me. And I don't think it's ever gonna leave. What would you do if you saw a shadow in your own home? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was the closet door. It was ajar just slightly, but the sight of it sent my heart into a low thud. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had closed it last night. I always check before I go to bed. Habit paranoia. call it what you will. But this morning, it was open. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe it hadn't caught properly. Maybe the old hinges were loose. But I couldn't stop staring at the narrow crack, the way the shadows inside seemed darker than they should have been. For a brief, irrational moment, I felt like I was being watched. Shaking my head, I got up and pushed the door shut, the faint resistance of the hinges unsettling me more than I cared to admit. As I stood there staring at the now closed door, a strain uneasiness settled over me. It felt like the moment before something happened. My hand still on the doorknob. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the air had thickened and muted every sound. The door was shut now, firmly in place, but it didn't feel like enough. My chest tightened with a vague, inexplicable dread. Shaking my head, I tried to break the spell. It's just a door, I told myself. A stupid door. I walked toward the bathroom, determined to shake off the creeping unease, but each step felt heavier than the last. Behind me, the closed door loomed in my mind like it was waiting for something. Waiting for me to look back. I didn't, not at first. But as I reached the bathroom door, my hand hesitated on the light switch. The sensation was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The prickle of being watched. My throat tightened as I forced myself to turn, my eyes snapping back to the closet. It was still shut, exactly as I'd left it. I let out a shaky breath and flicked on the bathroom light, the harsh, fluorescent glow flooding the room and banishing the creeping shadows. I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to laugh it off. But the reflection staring back didn't look convinced. My skin was pale, my hair slightly disheveled in my eyes. They looked tired, haunted even. Still, the morning had to go on. I splashed some cold water on my face, the shock snapping me out of the haze for a moment. The rational part of me took over, running through explanations. Maybe the latch didn't hold. Maybe there's a draft I didn't notice. Maybe. The sound stopped me mid-thought. A faint creak, soft but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I froze, straining to hear it again. Nothing. I turned back to the hallway, my body stiff with dread. The closet door was still shut. I laughed nervously, shaking my head, but the sound felt hollow. "You're hearing things now?" I thought, trying to force my breathing to slow. "You're letting your imagination get the best of you." But as I walked back to the bedroom, a small detail caught my eye, making my stomach drop. The faintest shadow, stretching out from beneath the closet door. It hadn't been there before. I froze mid-step, my breath caught in my throat as my eyes locked on the shadow. It was faint, just barely darker than the floor around it, but it was there, stretching out from the thin gap beneath the closet door. My brain scrambled to rationalize it. It's nothing. Maybe a trick of the light, maybe. Then it moved. Not a lot, just the smallest shift, like something inside the closet had adjusted its position. My knees felt weak, a wave of cold dread washing over me. For a long moment, I didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't move. My entire body was paralyzed, caught between fight and flight, though. Neither option felt remotely possible. The silence was suffocating. I strained my ears, desperate for any sound, anything to prove it. Wasn't imagining this, and then I heard it, a faint deliberate scrape, like something dragging lightly against the inside of the door. I took an instinctive step back, my legs trembling. "Hello," my voice came out weak, barely a whisper, and I hated myself for saying anything at all. What was I expecting? A response. Some part of me hoped for silence, for the absence of acknowledgement. Instead, the scraping sound stopped. The shadow didn't move again, but its presence lingered like a weight in the room, pulling at the edges of my sanity. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab my keys and bolt out the front door, but, morbid curiosity rooted me in place. I needed to know. I had to know. Summoning every ounce of courage I could muster, I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and the closet. My hand shook as I reached out, stopping just inches from the doorknob. My fingers hovered there, my pulse hammering in my ears. That's when I saw it, a faint, pale line appearing beneath the door. A crack of light. No, it wasn't light. It was flesh. Fingers. Thin, impossibly long fingers curling their way out from it. Under the door. I stumbled back with a strangled gasp, tripping over the edge of the rug and landing hard on the floor. My head spun as I scrambled to my feet, my back pressed against the wall. The fingers slid back out of sight, retreating into the darkness of the closet. And then the doorknob turned. It wasn't subtle or hesitant. It twisted sharply, deliberately, as though whatever was inside had grown tired of waiting. The door creaked open an inch, then two, revealing nothing but inky blackness beyond. I ran. I didn't grab my keys, my phone, or even my shoes. I bolted out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me and not stopping until I was outside, gulping the cold morning air. But even as I stood there, trembling and barefoot on the pavement, one thought consumed me. It wasn't just inside the closet. It was in my home. It had been waiting for me, staring up at my apartment window as if expecting to see something peering back at me. But it was still lifeless, just the blank face of a building hiding whatever horror was inside. A part of me wanted to keep running, to leave everything behind and never look back. But another part, a more stubborn, foolish part, refused to let whatever was in that closet win. My phone was still inside, my wallet, my keys, my life. I couldn't just abandon it all, could I? I took a few shuddering breaths, trying to steady my shaking hands. It's not real, I muttered to myself, the words hollow and unconvincing. It's just your imagination, stress. But deep down, I knew none of that was true. I'd seen those fingers. I'd heard the doorknob turn. A neighbor stepped outside to smoke, giving me a weird look as I stood there in my pajamas, barefoot on the pavement. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just, locked myself out. Clumsy me." He shrugged and went back to his cigarette, clearly uninterested in whatever weirdness was happening. I waited until he disappeared back inside before I moved again. The thought of going back in alone made my stomach churn, but I couldn't call anyone, not without my phone. I didn't even know what I'd say if I could. "Hi, I think there's something living in my closet. They'd think I was insane." I forced myself up the stairs, one shaky step at a time, each creak of the wooden steps feeling like a countdown to something terrible. My front door loomed ahead, still shut tight from when I'd slammed it behind me. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. For a brief second, I considered turning around and running again, but I pushed the thought aside. If I didn't face this now, I knew I never would. The door creaked open, revealing my apartment just as I'd left it, or so I thought. The living room was still, the air heavy and suffocating, carrying the faint metallic tang I'd noticed earlier. My shoes lay scattered by the door where I'd left them, the rug slightly askew from my earlier fall. Everything was the same, except it wasn't. The closet door was wide open. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing as my eyes locked on the gaping darkness. The door stood ajar, revealing rows of hanging clothes, but the shadows seemed to stretch beyond them, deeper than they should have gone. The light from the window didn't reach inside, as if the darkness itself was swallowing it whole. I forced myself to take a step forward, then another, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing against my ears like a weight. Then from within the closet, I heard it, a faint, raspy breathing. It was shallow, irregular, like something struggling to pull air into its lungs. My heart thundered as I reached for the light. Switch on the wall. My fingers fumbled over it, and for a moment, I thought I wouldn't be able to find it, but then the bulb flickered on, flooding the room with harsh yellow light. The closet was empty. No clothes shifted, no shadows moved. Everything was exactly as it should have been, the floor bare and the walls blank. And yet, the breathing didn't stop. It grew louder, coming from somewhere I couldn't see, somewhere deeper. My gaze fell to the bottom of the closet, to a small, square trapdoor I'd never noticed before, nestled against the back wall. The breathing was coming from there. I staggered backward, nearly tripping over the rug again as panic clawed its way up my throat. I wanted to leave, to run and never look back, but something held me there, frozen in place.
As if the closet was pulling at me, daring me to open that trapdoor and see what lay beneath.
"Stop," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't happening." When I opened them again, the trapdoor was ajar. A pale hand reached out from the darkness beneath it, gripping the edge of the wood with long, spindly fingers. My scream caught in my throat as the hand pulled, and a face began to emerge. Its skin was gray and stretched tight over its skull, its eyes black pits that seemed to absorb all light, and that smile, jagged and impossibly wide, cut across its face like a wound. It didn't lunge. It didn't even crawl out further. It just stared at me, that smile growing wider and wider, its head tilting unnaturally to the side as though amused by my terror. I ran. This time, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't even bother to shut the door behind me. I bolted out of the building and into the street, the sun glaring too brightly against my eyes. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, my chest heaving, my legs burning. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, that it had let me go on purpose. I didn't go back to the apartment. Not that day, not that week, not ever. I couldn't. I made excuse after excuse when the landlord called, asking if I was coming to collect my things. Every time I thought about stepping foot inside that place again, my stomach churned and my chest tightened. I stayed with a friend, Jenna, for the first few nights. She let me sleep on her couch, though I didn't get much rest. Every sound in her apartment made me flinch. A creak in the floorboards, a gust of wind rattling the windows. I kept the lights on, watching the shadows stretch and shift, waiting for that smile to reappear. Jenna tried to reassure me, but I could tell she didn't believe me. "You've been under a lot of stress," she said one night over takeout. "Moving into a new place, being on your own. It's normal to feel paranoid sometimes." But it wasn't paranoia. I knew what I'd seen. I couldn't erase it from my mind. The pale hand, reaching out, the impossibly wide smile, those hollow, empty eyes. The way it just... Me. I decided to have someone else pick up my things. I called a moving company, paying extra to have them handle everything without me being there. I wanted the connection to that place severed entirely. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. 2 nights later, while lying on Jenna's couch, I heard it again, the creaking sound. It was faint. At first, almost like it was coming from inside my own head. I told myself it was nothing, just the building settling, or maybe Jenna moving around in her room. But then I felt it, the same heavy presence that had filled my apartment that morning, the suffocating weight of being watched. I sat up, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of the streetlights outside. My eyes darted toward the corner of the living room, where Jenna kept a small coat closet. The door was slightly ajar. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Not here, not again." The creaking grew louder, more deliberate, and the door began to inch open. My pulse raced as I scrambled for my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it onto the floor. My gaze snapped back to the closet, and that's when I saw it. The same pale hand, the same long, spindly fingers curling around the edge of the door. Followed, sliding out of the shadows like a nightmare come to life. The eyes were black pits, empty and endless, and the jagged grin spread across its face as though it knew I couldn't escape. I bolted for Jenna's room, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My friend shot up in bed, startled and confused as I babbled incoherently about the closet.
"It's here. I managed to choke."
Out, tears streaming down my face. It followed me. She didn't believe me, not fully. She opened the door to the living room despite my protests, her face set with irritation and concern, but when she came back, her expression had changed. She didn't say anything, but her hands were trembling as she locked the bedroom door behind her. The next day, I packed what little I'd brought with me and left. I couldn't stay there, couldn't put Jenna in danger, or anyone else for that matter. I moved in with my parents, hoping the distance would keep me safe. For a while it worked. Weeks passed without incident. I started to think maybe it was over. But it wasn't. Last night, I woke up to a faint creaking sound. My childhood bedroom was pitch black, the closet door shut tightly just as I'd left it, but the sound didn't stop. Slowly, I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing squarely on the closet door. It was open. Not much, just crack, but enough. I didn't wait to see what was inside. I grabbed my keys, my shoes, and I ran. I'm sitting in my car now, typing this on my phone, trying to figure out where to go. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. No matter where I run, it will follow. It always does. What would you do if you noticed your closet door open when you were sure you closed it? Tell us your survival strategy. The road seemed to stretch forever, the empty pavement glowing faintly under the pale moonlight. My car's engine hummed steadily, the only sound in the oppressive quiet of the night. I checked the clock, 2:47, the kind of hour where the world feels abandoned, like I was the only person left alive. I wasn't tired, not really, but something about the stillness felt wrong, the way the shadows clung to the edges of the road, the way the headlights seemed too weak to push them back. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights or taillights, any sign of life. But there was nothing. Just me, the road, and a growing tension that I couldn't explain. My hand reached to adjust the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it, or thought I did. Faint, flickering movement in the back seat like someone shifting just out of sight. My heart stuttered. I blinked and looked again, but it was gone. The back seat was empty, but the sensation of being watched settled over me, heavy and unshakable. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, but my grip on the wheel tightened, my knuckles turning. Pale under the faint dashboard glow, the rational part of my mind screamed that it was nothing, just a shadow, a trick of the light bouncing off the windows, but the feeling lingered, that heavy, oppressive weight, unseen eyes boring into the back of my head. I flicked my gaze back to the rearview mirror, unable to help myself. The back seat was just as empty as before, the leather surface catching faint glints from the dashboard lights. Nervously, a brittle sound that felt too loud in the silent car. "You're losing it," I muttered under my breath. "Just focus on driving." But as I spoke, something prickled at the edges of my awareness, a faint shift in the air, the kind of subtle change you feel when someone moves too close to you. My eyes darted to the side mirror, then the passenger seat, and finally the rear view mirror again. Still nothing. Except, was the back seat darker than before? I adjusted the mirror, leaning forward slightly to get a better view. My stomach churned as I stared at the reflection, searching for what exactly had changed. The back seat was empty, just as it had been a dozen glances ago, but the darkness seemed deeper, like the shadows were thicker, almost moving. My foot eased off the accelerator, my car slowing as my heartbeat thundered in my chest. I didn't want to stop. I couldn't stop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't keep driving either. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a straight line swallowed by the night, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. The hum of the engine filled the void, almost hypnotic, but then it wavered. Through, a soft, rhythmic sound, like someone breathing. The breath wasn't mine. I whipped my head around, my eyes scanning the back seat. The headlights from the dashboard lit up the emptiness behind me, but my chest tightened as the sound continued, low and steady. I turned back to the wheel, trying to convince myself it was just the wind outside, or maybe the sound of the tire on the road. But deep down, I knew better. A voice broke the silence, faint but unmistakable, coming from right behind me. "You shouldn't be here." My heart stopped. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands ached, the rubber digging into my palms. The voice had been low, almost a whisper, but there was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, had spoken. "You shouldn't be here." The words echoed in my head over and over, each repetition more chilling than the last. My breath came in short gasps as I glanced in the rearview mirror again, terrified of what I might see. For a moment I thought I caught a flicker of movement, a shape, faint and blurry, just out of focus. My pulse roared in my ears. "No," I whispered to myself, shaking my head as if I could shake away the fear. "It's nothing."
You're tired. You're imagining things. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true.
The air in the car felt heavier now, colder, as though something invisible was pressing against me. The faint smell of something unfamiliar wafted through the cabin, wet earth maybe, or metal. My stomach churned as I gripped the wheel tighter and fixed my gaze on the road ahead. But I couldn't ignore it any longer. The weight of the presence in the car was undeniable now, and my body screamed at me to look back, slowly against every instinct to keep my eyes forward. I tilted the rearview mirror, slightly downward. There it was. It was. A figure sat in the middle of the back seat, illuminated faintly by the dashboard glow. I could barely make out its features. Its face was pale, almost translucent, with deep, hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just sat there, staring directly at me through the mirror. A shudder tore through me, and I nearly lost control of the car, swerving sharply to the right. Tires scraped the edge of the asphalt, and I fought to steady the wheel, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip it. When I dared to glance back at the mirror, the figure was still there, unmoving, unblinking, as if it had always been there. "What do you want?" I croaked, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. The figure didn't respond. It didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. It just stared, its hollow eyes locked on me. "Leave," I said, louder this time, the words trembling as they left my lips. "Get out of my car." My voice cracked, desperation taking over. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed my foot on the brake, the car skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating the empty stretch of asphalt, but the car felt suffocating now, as though the air itself was pressing in on me. I turned in my seat, finally forcing myself to confront whatever was in the back seat. The seat was empty. Nothing. No figure, no shadow, just the worn fabric of the upholstery and the faint light from the dashboard. My hands were still shaking as I turned back to face the road, my mind reeling. I didn't know whether to feel relief or terror. And then I saw it again, its reflection in the mirror, still sitting there, still watching me. It hadn't left. It was never going to leave. I slammed the car into park, my breathing erratic as my eyes darted between the rearview mirror and the back seat. The reflection was there, clear as day, but the seat behind me remained visibly empty. My mind couldn't reconcile what I was seeing. I blinked rapidly, hoping the reflection would vanish, but it didn't. The figure shifted slightly in the mirror, its head tilting to the side in an unnatural, jerky motion. As though studying me, its hollow eyes bore into mine, and for a moment the faint trace of a grin curled at the edges of its pale, cracked lips. I couldn't stay in the car. I had to get out. My fingers fumbled with the seatbelt, struggling to release it. Every part of me screamed to escape, but another part, the same sick curiosity that had made me glance in the mirror to begin with, kept my eyes locked on the figure. As I finally unbuckled the seatbelt, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the cabin, sharp and grating like a scream muffled by interference. I hadn't touched the radio. I hadn't even turned it on. The static wasn't random. It shifted, forming faint words buried in the noise. "Shouldn't be here." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no, no." The figure's grin widened in the mirror, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth. It leaned forward slightly, its reflection growing closer, even though the back seat remained physically empty. Yanked the door handle, desperate to get out, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. The car lights flickered, the dashboard dimming as the temperature in the cabin plummeted. I screamed, kicking at the door, punching at the lock, and then everything went silent. The static cut out, the flickering stopped, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted just slightly. I froze, my hand still gripping the door handle. Slowly, cautiously, I glanced at the rearview mirror one more time. The figure wasn't there. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. A soft, wet sound, like a rasping breath, came from directly behind me. My head turned slowly, dreading what I already knew was there. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was in the back seat. I don't remember how I got out. My mind blanked, my body moving on instinct. One moment, I was in the car. The next, I was sprinting down the dark road, my feet pounding against the asphalt. As the night air burned my lungs, I didn't stop running until my legs gave out and I collapsed onto the gravel shoulder. I looked back, expecting to see the car behind me, but the road was empty. No headlights, no taillights, nothing. Just darkness stretching in every direction. My car was gone. I sat there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. The figure, the static, the way. It had leaned closer as if it was trying to,
What? Hurt me! Speak to me! Claim me! None of it!
made sense, and that only made it worse. Eventually, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A truck slowed as it neared, the driver rolling down their window. You okay? They asked, their voice gruff but concerned. I nodded, numbly, unable to form words, and they offered me a ride to the nearest town. I didn't look back down the road as I climbed into the truck. I didn't want to see the car again. I didn't want to see it again. I've told myself 100 times that it's over, that whatever I saw that night, whatever, followed me, was left behind, but I know it's a lie. The nightmares haven't stopped. The static sometimes faint and distant, like a radio tuned to a dead station. And just last night, as I walked past my bedroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of something behind me, a pale face, hollow eyes, and that impossibly wide grin. It's still with me. It always will be. What would you do if you noticed someone in your back seat during a late night drive? Share your thoughts or similar experiences in the comments.